This podcast is brought to you by Humans, the next generation HRIS supporting distributed organizations globally.
Adam, I'm massively excited to have you around with us today. Thanks very much for taking the time. I've been following your work at OpenOrg for a while now. So yeah, super excited about this conversation. Super excited to dive a bit into the performance topic, which seems to be pretty hot topic these days. But before we jump straight in, I would love for you to tell us a little bit of your story.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me on, and pleasure. And a little bit about me and OpenOrg. So I spent the last 14 or so years primarily as a founder or co-founder of my own companies. So that's sort of included 4 now in total. And so in terms of coming into the people and HR space, it's not been a traditional path. I've sort of fallen into it and always worn the hat of people and ops in any of the businesses that I've built, but have trodden that path that most teams in startups will tread, building things from scratch, breaking them, building them again, iterating everything from compensation, hiring, performance, which we'll dive into later. So lots of stories to tell on that front, seen lots, and seen lots in particular around the topic of transparency, which has been something that I've talked for 14 years about with my co-founder, John. So we've both had experiences along the way of how transparency can be incredibly powerful and beneficial to companies. I've seen that play out in my own companies, but we've also had experiences of how transparency or lack of transparency can be incredibly damaging to both people experience and candidate experience. So we always wanted to build something together. The stars aligned end of 2022. We both had an opportunity to get chatting and talking about what we could do. And we both saw this opportunity for companies to embrace transparency as a lever to build better companies, basically, build high performing teams. And so we set about looking at what we could do to build that. And the end product was OpenOrg. Fast forward to today, 18 months or so later, we're a two-person team. We work with small startup, scale-up people teams and leadership teams on designing and managing culture and taking it beyond values, effectively making it feel clearer, more transparent, so that people have more clarity around how we make decisions, how we communicate, how we do performance, for example. And we have built a few things that people teams use. Community is one of those things, an advisory support service that we provide to a small handful of startup scale-up people teams, and also spend a lot of time building other mini products, as it were, a few of which are out there in the open now as well. So absolutely love it.
Beautiful. I mean, from the outside, the feedback we see about OpenOrg is incredible. Like, people seems to love it, so you're definitely doing something right there. I would be very curious to know how this project was received from the actual people community and talent community there, and also if when you started this project there was a different goal and different mission and how they actually changed over the last couple of years.
The answer to that is yes. We set out with a very specific idea as to what we would build, and that has changed a little bit or evolved. But we honestly were blown away by the reception from the people community when we launched. We are two guys down in the southwest of the UK. We didn't know what to expect. This was a very new idea that we'd come up with. There wasn't much to look at as a comparison. So we didn't know what to expect when we launched it, but we were blown away by just how much people cared about transparency at work and how much it resonated with them about the dangers of companies not being transparent. And we expected to maybe start working with a few companies in the UK, but very quickly realized there's a lot of people in the US and Europe and Australia and New Zealand who want to be part of this, which eventually fed community, which was a natural evolution for us. But when we first launched, OpenOrg actually was the core focus of it really was our accreditation, which we still do and we still offer, but it was intended to be the only thing that we offered at the start, and that was like a B Corp style company accreditation, where we go in, we verify levels of transparency and work as that accountability partner to support companies through that, and maintain that. And we've been very, very proud to accredit and support a number of companies through that. But over time, what we do, how we do it, has actually evolved outside of that accreditation. And again, it's been amazing to see how some of those products, services, things that we've built have been received.
What does the role that you play with OpenOrg in supporting the people community?
It's to cater for people in different situations with different budgets, different resources. On a very basic level, we do a lot around curating and building open source resources and products, so that the folks who have no budget have an opportunity to go and find and see what other people are doing and have a starting point that they can work from. And we are called OpenOrg. We're big on transparency, so that plays really, really nicely into the mission that we're on, and that we're building a community as such globally of people that are really seem to be really getting a lot from that, which is amazing. But we then spotted this opportunity to build a community primarily on Slack for people in the startup space, because there is that realization there that they're often operating in a 1 or 2 person team, and they're in the leadership team, but they don't have access to the leadership team as many people do. They also can't speak to other people in the business, so they're in this echo chamber, they're on their own. And having that opportunity for people to speak safely to peers, to get advice, sounding boards, sparring partners in a community setting has been incredibly valuable. So we've had a lot of fun building that. It's been a year or so, and we decided to cap it, but we're reaching our 500 cap soon, which has been exciting. And we're members of that community as well, so we spend a lot of time every day in there too.
A key part of what you do is about creating this culture in people operations around collaboration, community building, and connecting people together. How do you see this role being actually applied in the context of a business, and how the mindset can shift in the day-to-day life of a kind of a people ops person in general, and apply maybe to a performance process, for example, or any other process that you have to be more collaborative, transparent, and
yeah, it's an interesting one. I think deep down, some of the things that we talk about seem fairly obvious to folks when we talk about the benefits of co-creating things in your business and using everyone else's brain power, not just the executive team's brain power. It's really powerful, and people will nod, but you don't always have the opportunity to sit down and think about what does it actually look like in my business. You're working at 100 miles an hour, and you're probably under pressure just to build something and do something, and quite often that means taking something that is cut and paste from another business, and it doesn't always work in your context. So we spend a lot of time working with people to help them either validate what they have already built and work out whether it's going to work for them. Lots of review, feedback, peer, and that's not just from us, that's from other people in the community as well, but utilizing the people around you to validate or work out whether something could be improved, and taking that into your business to try and encourage that idea of co-creation within your company as well. And we spend a lot of time also helping people teams to replicate the idea of community within their business as well, particularly with groups like managers. Touched on this with a lot of people, but traditional manager training doesn't work, and people tend to agree with that quite heavily. What we tend to do as an example of creating community within a business is creating communities of practice, particularly for managers. So self-sustaining places where you can hold each other accountable, learn from each other, share experience. So there's a lot of the things that we do in community that we try and help people to bring into their companies as well.
Great. And one of the reasons why I was excited about having this conversation today is because you get to see and work with so many people, HR and talent leaders as well. And I assume there is some level of kind of trends that you can spot relatively earlier on, and this goes to the point around performance that we're gonna be spending some time talking about today. We've seen very interesting market dynamics with lots of changes and transition over the last 4 years, where perhaps performance management was done in a way that was, let's say, a little bit more loose in, like 2021, 2022. Then there was lots of mess that happened in the market in 2023, and in 2024 we're seeing higher level of scrutiny. There was way more perhaps aggression from a business perspective to really try and quickly identify who are the best people, who are the people that are not meeting the standards that we expect, and then run a process that is efficient, fast, and very effective. What's your perspective there? What are you seeing there? What's broken today, if anything, really, with performance management?
Yeah, great question. It's and you're right. It's definitely being felt more in the last few years, and I've experienced that as a founder throughout that 2020 to 2022 craziness that went on. So I have my own views on that, for sure. I think performance or challenges with performance go back way further, of course. So everyone's always struggled with it, from what I can tell, and there's always been grumbles from execs, employees, and people teams. But the last 4 or 5 years feels very sort of concentrated. And I think coming out of COVID 2021, and I again felt this myself as a founder, to solve problems around revenue or performance, quite often you just throw headcount in. A lot of companies did, and a lot of that was being fueled by VCs actually. Very easy to raise more money than you needed. Headcount was just an easy solution to hit the targets you needed to hit, and VC seemed happy with that. Fast forward to now, it's a completely different situation, particularly again for VC-backed companies. They're heading into funding rounds and being told by VCs, you need to show X amount of revenue per employee versus what you might have needed to show us previously to raise the money you need. So companies are needing to squeeze, as it were, more performance per person than they used to have to, and they're having to look inwards to say, how can we do that, and what does that mean? They're turning to things like AI, which has its application and benefits, but they're having more pressure to perform or hit their revenue targets with much smaller teams, and that's leading them to put a much bigger spotlight. And that honestly is probably the number one challenge that we find most people have in the community that we see day to day, and also the clients that we support.
Why do you think companies in general struggle with the performance reviews?
I think to your point as well about whether they're broken, I try and work out. That phrase gets used for lots of different things, and this thing is dead or this thing is broken. I think it's not broken. It's possibly just not being used in the right way. So a lot of what I see startup and scale up companies do in particular is take something that works relatively well in larger corporate environments and try and apply it in a startup. And that doesn't work, and it's maybe over-engineered. So how you're maybe trying to apply it is broken. But that's not to say the process itself doesn't work anymore. It just needs the right setting. But I think some of the challenges that I see around performance are, number one, it is an area that a lot of people struggle with. And there's not many public examples of companies talking and documenting about how they do it well, because no one's quite sure. And it's also a bit of a secretive thing to talk about. So that doesn't help startup, scale up people teams as a starting point, who need to go out and find those examples and inspiration. There's not much of that out there. And there's some amazing examples of companies who are making strides here and helping massively. People like Duro and Thomas, who you've had on before as well, doing some amazing work here, as well as a few others. But that's definitely one challenge. The other challenge is just finding something that is appropriate for you as a business, but also connecting the dots between performance and things like pay and progression and company goals. They're all connected, and often they're all like the Christmas lights from your Christmas tree, like tangled up, messy, really, really hard to unravel, and it's hard to know where to start.
Are there specific trends that you see shaping up today?
Yeah, I think there's definitely people who, rightly or wrongly, feel like they need to be moving more towards a place where they're moving away from annual, one-shot annual like performance reviews to something a bit more continuous, to like the check-in model and so on and so forth. So how do we transition from that to that? What does that look like? What do we need in place to make this work? There's definitely a lot of people who want to go down that path. How can we utilize AI to speed that up, make it easier? One of the big problems on a lot of people's plates seems to be the time that they invest in having to do performance reviews. So again, trying to find ways that we can make this slicker, easier, more effective seems to be what some people's agendas to try and improve.
What's your view on AI in general? I mean, obviously, we see a massive level of adoption of AI at different level for different type of companies in different aspects. We've seen lots of tools coming for the go-to-market side of things, the support side of things. Still unclear where AI can drive help on the actual HR and people space. But what's your view there on AI applications that can specifically support on a performance cycle?
From what I've seen so far, I think there's really good opportunity for AI to play a part. This is a really hard one for companies to balance, because there's such a human element to performance and feedback in particular, which really grounds performance, particularly if you're trying to go down a route of continuous feedback and performance. It comes from human beings. And so how you incorporate AI into that, I think, is a real challenge. But being able to synthesize and crunch data, if it's documented well, if you're collecting it in the right way, I think AI has a really great opportunity to help speed that up. I think it has a really great opportunity also to play a bit of a sparring partner, a very non-biased sparring partner to human beings. We talk a lot about calibration and helping managers work out how best to appraise people. If you are able to use something like AI to sense check how you are appraising someone and have a non-human sparring partner, I think that really helps. And trying to remove bias as much as possible and gut feel from performance as a process is something that a lot of people are very aware that they need to do. So it has its applications. I haven't seen anything out there yet that's perfect, that works really, really well. Having said that, my message to people would be, don't feel like it has to be perfect. Just play around with it. Try and experiment, particularly if you're in a startup scale up, and see how you can use it to support the work you do.
I mean, the data processing piece is what we definitely see has high value, high impact, where there's a number of things that happen already in a number of companies where, end of the day, if you have a mechanic that can process data really quickly, let's say I'm running a performance reprocess, I'm collecting data, we process the data, and then I want to get out of it kind of some level of output. You want to make sure that you can do that as fast as possible, as efficiently as possible, but then try and match some sort of trend, pattern, whatever, with what is the desired outcome. In this case, you mentioned, how do we support managers? Maybe the trend that we see is in our organizations, managers are not strong at giving direct feedback to people, or maybe they need kind of hand holding in some areas and not in some others. So maybe they need to be pushed to have kind of high frequency of conversations with their team. And that's something that we see people wanting a little bit more help, and where they are kind of craving for solutions, and AI can play a meaningful role there.
Yeah, we had an example of a company recently who we spoke to, and there was some resistance from managers to adopt AI, and ultimately a fear that if AI is doing a lot of this work for me, like, why would you need a manager? I suddenly, as much as they moan about having to spend time filling out reviews, they're also a bit fearful of, what part do I play in this business if AI can do a lot of the work that I'm meant to be doing as well? And also there's an angle that I see of L&D and support and development of managers. There's an argument there also to say, the more you get technology to do for you, the less intentional managers have to be about learning how to do feedback well, because the machine's doing it for them, for example. And how do I build that muscle of giving good feedback if I don't need to think about how how I get to that point. So there is a danger there as well that companies lose that ability to develop people in the right way if they lean too much on AI. But I think, again, if it's used in the right way, it's...
How do you see that in the context of organizations now thinking about higher level of impact with a much leaner team? Because when we look at a market where you are scaling massively through headcount, training people, ramping people, coaching people is extremely, extremely important, because it's going to have a massive impact. But now we're seeing companies with incredible small, lean teams, they can accomplish, they can move mountains, basically. What's your view there? Like, are we going to see, again, a very different, paradigm in how business are structured, and obviously from a people and culture perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I use OpenOrg as an example. We're a 2-person team. We work very fast. We have an 80-20 type approach to what we do. We don't never sit there and try and perfect something before we launch it, but we work very fast. We get it out there. We improve it very quickly, and that's to our nature and works really well for us. But we get a lot more done in our tiny team of 2 than a lot of bigger companies and teams would, with bogged down with the lack of communication and so on and so forth. One of my favorite companies out there talking about this publicly as well, so you can go and look at their handbook, as a company called OpenOrg. They talk a lot about the fact that they operate in very, very small teams, almost like startups within a startup. So I think approaching 100 employees now, but they operate in very, very small teams, very open about the fact that this isn't a place for middle managers. Actually, there's very few managers in that team, and we're all ICs, and we all have the autonomy to build what we need to build and do what we need to do. It's a great environment for some people and not for others, but works incredibly well for them, and they build, ship, iterate way faster than anyone else, and do it incredibly well. So I'm of the belief that can work very, very well. But again, it's always down to founder, co-founders, leadership. If they don't work well in that environment, that model won't work for them either. So it's important to build something that's right for you.
Thinking about high impact, if you had to come up with a framework that is specifically on, again, performance review cycles, that is high impact, high efficiency, how would you structure it?
I'd make it as continuous as possible. If I use an example from previous company as well, which I should say is highly contextual to us. We were a consultancy. We had 90% of our team members doing one role, which is very unusual for a lot of companies. We didn't have the headaches or challenges that other companies might have with engineering teams, product teams, marketing teams, etc. But we had an ever-changing environment for a large number of our employees, and that made it very hard to have a one-size-fits-all approach to performance. So we tore it up, and we had previously been doing the usual sort of 6-monthly performance reviews through our HRIS, and they served some purpose, but not. I couldn't see what they were really adding at the time. So we tore it up, and for us, high impact was getting to the point where everyone in the business knew where they were currently from a progression perspective, what their next step was, how they get to that next step, i.e. what's required, and at any given time knew exactly how they were performing along the way. And that for us required real clarity on business direction and goals from the very get-go, clarity on individual goals, how I can impact those business goals and what's expected of me, clarity on how I'm performing against those goals. And that was all wrapped around continuous conversations that we fed into our one-to-ones. So that became part of that one-to-one agenda. And every single week or every 2 weeks, a manager was spending time with their IC and their team talking about goals. And these goals were self-set as well. So again, highly contextual to that individual and the business that they're in, but the most impactful they could possibly be to the environment that they were working in as well. Gave real autonomy to the individuals that were setting those goals, but also helped create really personalized development plans for them as well.
What's your view on frequency? Like, different companies have, different type of structure. Some can run a cycle days, they're standard every 6 months or can be every 3 months. I recall Apple in the early days. I don't know if things have changed today, but like Jobs was against performance review. And I believe for a very long time, Apple was not running performance reviews. And his perspective was everybody should be aware all the time if they are performing or not performing, and you should give the feedback in the moment right in there. So what's your view there?
I think it's contextual to business. I think there are companies where yearly reviews will work incredibly well, and there are companies where no reviews will work incredibly well because you replace that with what we were trying to do previously, an element of just continuous feedback. So you never, if you visualize, if there's a company out there that's wanting to scrap performance reviews for one reason or another, if you can visualize sort of, or answer the question of like, okay, we've removed these reviews. Why have we been able to remove them? What do we do that means we don't have to run these anymore? You can start to build a picture of what building blocks you need to put in place instead to fully replace them. I think on frequency, it really depends also on some of those other things I touched on earlier. There are connected parts to this that are really important. So pay and progression. Mm-hmm. I would argue that in a lot of smaller startups and scale-ups, you should have an ability to progress, promote, reward people in real time. So again, example from my previous company, we didn't do yearly salary reviews or performance reviews. If someone earned promotion in April because they'd hit target, they were promoted and announced in April. And if someone then got it in May, we do it then. As you get bigger as a company, I fully appreciate that can be harder to do. If you're 1,000, 2,000, 10,000 person business, you need some structure around how and when that's done, arguably. But in smaller companies, you have the freedom to promote and progress people at different times of the year. And so from a frequency element, I don't think you need to have like a snapshot point in the year. However, if you're in a larger company and you maybe tie performance to pay, and we do pay reviews, and there's a pot of money that we can split and we can only give a certain amount to the top 10%, there is good reason for why you should probably bring some sort of yearly review process in place.
We shared a breakfast just today with a few people leaders talking about these topics, and it seems that talking about performance and compensation together can create some level of tension. And if on top of that you had the scoring system, rating systems, it starts to get like, very messy. Some people can feel uncomfortable with this type of conversation. What's your view there? How do you make sure that it's not an uncomfortable type of conversation to have, and how do you make sure that people get it right?
Yeah, I think what I've found over the years is, and I've experienced this recently as well, you keep learning and reminding yourself that you need to put these things in place. But we previously had all the building blocks in place around career framework and how performance tied into that, and pay and so on and so forth. But one thing we realized we missed really as we were growing from 2 people to 80 or so was managing people's expectations around how long they should be performing for. And what you find, and it's a natural thing for people to do, but people start performing and saying, hey, I'm doing well, I should be looking at promotion. The reality was we had people in our business previously who may be performing for a very short period of time and were starting to think about what that next step might be like. And we hadn't given them clarity over what we saw as consistency. So we tend to find that a lot of companies haven't been clear enough with people about how long you need to be performing at this level before you can get that pay rise, or before you can be promoted. And that's a big thing that a lot of people seem to miss out on. So get clear on what you think that timeline looks like and how long performance needs to be seen across those levels. And get clear on, if you have performance reviews, how can you, if you need to, how do you decouple those from pay rise conversations? Because invariably everyone ends up...
In your opinion, those things should be decoupled?
Not necessarily, but what we found was people went into the performance review season, as it were, thinking, great, this is my opportunity now to get a pay rise. And if I don't get one now, I won't get one for another 6 months. And that's what we tore up. We changed it so that people were very clear on the fact that we do performance reviews still every 6 months, but they're really more for like 360 feedback. Outside of those cycles, you can still get a pay rise, you can still get promoted. So we were very clear with people that these are not opportunities to talk about pay rises and promotions. We will talk about that at another time, and you'll have your own personal development plan for that. And once we set expectations there, we use those performance reviews to talk about performance and not pay.
When we look at performance, there are a lot of people that actually involved in the process, a different level from a leadership perspective. When you have in particular large organizations and you start to get a little bit detached from some people, again, some roles and so on, you want to know who are the best people in the business, who are the people that are driving the highest level of impact, who are the people that are not performing at the level we expect. Then there is the managerial components where you create some level of, maybe even emotional connection with your reports, the people that you are looking after, you care about, and obviously people are helping you to be successful as well. And then there is the role of the people, teams, and HR that maybe are a little bit more focused on the process component, making sure the framework is right, making sure that they can provide visibility and obviously support all the people involved. Like, what's your view on, in an ideal scenario, what should be the actual role of each profile persona involved in the process?
Yeah, great question. And thinking on the spot a little bit. I'm a fan of the sort of product-led mindset sort of approach that's going around in the people space at the moment, and thinking about people team as product team, building something for your customers, i.e. your people. So thinking in that vein of mind a little bit, the role that I see, that I guess starting at leadership team, executive team, it's really vital, particularly with performance, that they are seen as integral to that, because when you're tying things like progression, pay, and thinking about getting the best performance possible out of people, that has to come from the top. It has to come from what the business needs ultimately, rather than what we would like to give people. So they've got to be involved, and I guess in some respects they set the vision and set the direction for what we need as a business. The role that I see the people team is doing alongside that is actually sort of building that people product. What does this look like, feel like, based on the requirements that we have as a business commercially to achieve what we need to achieve, and what's going to maximize human potential in this company if we can get it right. Then you need to be able to enable the managers, the users of that product, and the ICs are beneath those managers, to get the most out of that product as well. They are the customers, they are the users. So making sure you can enable them through good documentation, training, support as best as possible, so that they get the most out of that product is really, really key. It's not the people team's job to make sure that people are performing though. And that's where the managers come in, and that's where often they're left alone a little bit. They don't quite understand how this thing works. They've not had the enablement, and they don't have the support to do their role properly. So that's where we see a lot of other problems.
How do they get the right level of support?
So a big problem that no company seems to have cracked from a manager perspective. There's so many companies out there offering manager training and playbooks and all sorts of stuff. But what we've found over time, and I've personally found over time, is I've paid to send managers on these sort of crash courses or one hit days out of the office, and actually it's a waste of money. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't sink in. So we've crafted our own way of supporting managers in a business, and that works incredibly well for us and that we believe in. But generally speaking, for us, it starts with making sure you've got the right people in place as managers first. There's too many accidental managers out there. That's the biggest problem to start with. So have we defined what a manager is here? Are they a player coach? How big are their team? What does that mean for their day job as well? What does that profile of person look like? Their accountabilities, their responsibilities. What do we need in that role? Have we identified the right people for that role? And are we supporting them through that as well, through documentation, handbooks,
If we agree on the fact that it's important to have, a strong framework for performance management, how do we get leadership to buy into that and create a culture that is truly kind of, performance driven type culture, specifically when we are in a moment where, again, we're coming from, your 3-4 months performance review cycles. We hate it. Everybody is not engaged with it, and it feels like, a waste of time. So we're going through, massive level of efficiency is expected. So maybe there is also an element of trust there that he is lacking because you feel the process is broken, when, as you said, maybe it's not necessarily the process broken. There is something else there. So how do you get, to build up the level of trust and make, the right level of investment in a high performing culture?
Yeah, I would say if there's a people person out there who's struggling to get buy-in from an executive team member about, or agreement that we need a high performing culture, then run for the exit. You shouldn't need to argue that point too much. It should be a question of, do we agree that we need to have a high performing business? And if the answer is no, then you're in the wrong place probably. So I imagine most will agree and align on the fact that we both think we need that. Where there's difference of opinion probably is in how we do that. And that's again where my experience, again working with smaller startup scale-ups, has been actually that a lot of CEOs, founders, execs do want to strip that back. They want to keep it as simple as possible, because quite often a lot of CEOs still have a lot of direct reports themselves as well. They don't want to be sitting there filling out lots of performance reviews, and they're not great at doing it either. They're not great managers themselves often. So how do we build something that's very simple, but still ticks the boxes that we need? And that's where, for me, there's a disconnect. So I usually would encourage leaders to sit down with their exec team and actually try and find out what is the problem that we are facing right now, linked to performance, and can we try and work out what the root cause is there? Ideate on a few things, test a few things, and try and come up with a solution that we think is actually going to solve the problem that we're facing. For me, that actually tends to be like clarity of goals and direction of business and what's expected of people, rather than how the performance process itself is delivered.
Any other advice you have for people leaders out there? Can be specific on performance or more broadly.
I tend to try and get people to do a bit of a reflective exercise again, rather than. It's amazing that there are ever increasingly more and more public examples of companies out there talking about how we do performance and how we do this here. And it's amazing to have that inspiration out there, and it's great, and it's a big part of what OpenOrg does, and we try and find more of that, we share that, we encourage people to share more of that as well. But don't just take that and try and apply it in your business. Spend time with the exec team, find out what we need first. That's the most important part. As much as we want to make people happy and take things off of managers' plates, etc., you've got to do what's right for the company first. And if it means time invested in performance reviews, that's the best thing to do. Find out what the business needs. Think about what we're doing now, what's working, what's not working, and then take it from there. Try and work out, again, what that problem is and what do we need to do to actually solve that problem, rather than what's someone else doing to solve that problem.
Very insightful. Adam, what's next for OpenOrg? Any exciting initiatives?
Loads. Anyone who speaks to us or knows us knows that we've got about 20 or 30 different things at any one time that we want to build or do. So short term, this is already done, but we're growing it and still launching it, as it were. We recently launched a site called openverse.fyi. So mission with that is to curate, find all the open people and culture resources in the world and put them in one place, so that people teams can go and find free open resources and share and discover in one place. And that's been amazing to see how that's been received, but it's very early days and we've got lots of plans with that. We are launching a new playbook soon, all around EVP and employer brand, but authentic EVP, which we're really excited about launching very soon. And also ramping up our people metrics product, which we built a year or so ago actually, but haven't had the time to be like super intentional on scaling, and that now is the sort of time where we're sort of putting a lot more focus into how we can mature that. So that's on the plans too.
Outside of the OpenOrg ecosystem, any other resources that for you are massively beneficial from, again, books, reading materials, podcasts that you really enjoy and you find helpful?
I think on the performance front in particular, one that I would that sticks in my mind and has since I read it. If anyone hasn't read this yet, but I imagine so many people probably have, is Jessie Zwan's 3-parter. She's actually got a few of those, but her Medium blog, she's done an amazing one on performance and how that links to pay as well, and compensation. So if anyone's sort of starting out there or feeling their way through this topic, I think that is a really great starting point. And I've got a load more resources as well. If you want to drop me a note on LinkedIn, I've got a nice one page where I can probably send you on that as well.
Super helpful. And would assume is LinkedIn the best place for people to connect with you?
Yeah, sadly, that's where I live about 20 hours of the day. So I'm always online, always around. If you ever need anything, send me a note.
Amazing. Adam, this has been a fascinating conversation and massively appreciated you taking the time. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much.